Hello guys, welcome back. Well, today is Sunday, the 11th of December 2016, and finally there are officials admitting radioactive fish off the US West Coast have, quote, disturbing fingerprints of Fukushima, end quote. And this is on the Zero Hedge website, submitted by Mac Slavo via shtfplan.com. The entire Pacific coast of the United States, Canada, and Mexico have been contaminated with radioactive particles from Fukushima. And finally, it is being officially acknowledged. This is really happening. It is a stark reminder that the effects from Fukushima radiation continually spilling into the ocean have not been abated. The site continues to leak highly toxic radioactive material to this day. Nothing has stopped. And guys, if you're thinking, well, this doesn't affect me, I don't live in America. Well, let me tell you something about the oceans. The oceans, over the years, circulate the entire globe. They all have channels of flow, which then merge with other oceans. So actually, this spreads the entire world. And this has now been going on for years. Radiation from Japan's Fukushima nuclear disaster detected on Oregon shores. Seaborne radiation from Japan's Fukushima nuclear disaster has been detected on Oregon shores, researchers say. Seawater samples from Tillamook Bay and Gold Beach indicate radiation from the nuclear disaster, but at extremely low levels, not harmful to humans or the environment. Of course, they claim that it is, quote, safe because the levels are low. USA Today emphasized the ridiculously minuscule dose of radiation that, say, a swimmer would get on the beach, while admitted for the first time that those warning about the spreading radiation were in fact correct. Should we be worried about the Fukushima radiation? The levels are very low and shouldn't harm people eating fish from the west coast or swimming in the ocean, according to Ken Busela, a senior scientist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Cesium-134, the so-called fingerprint of Fukushima, was measured in seawater samples taken from the Tillamook Bay and Gold Beach in Oregon, according to researchers from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Of course, the idea that radiation was reaching California and the West Coast, and that fish were being contaminated by Fukushima radiation from thousands of miles across the Pacific, was considered, yet, quote, fake news, end quote, at the time. The alarmist cries of conspiracy theorists and hypochondriacs were just nonsense, gibberish, delusions and paranoia. Typical hyperbolic nonsense from people caught up in the echo chamber. And guys, you'll also be remembering that a lot of fish and whales and all sorts of things were washing up on the shores, yet scientists were, quote, unable to identify what was occurring. It's obvious that the radiation is killing everything inside of the ocean on the west coast. There's been independent guys that have been going down there with, I forget the name of the tool, Geiger meter or whatever it is that reads radioactive particles, are seeing increasing readings throughout the years. You're also having people who are actually divers and have been documenting the seabed for like the last 5 years, 10 years, and they have noticed that everything is dying off. But now it is an admitted fact that Fukushima radiation is impacting US shores. Sorry to ignore and deride your claims. Above group of deplorables. Turns out you were right, or at least onto something. The source in this story, as well as most of the other, quote, big, end quote, stories on Fukushima over the past several years, is Ken Busela from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. He has been a consistent and authoritative voice on Fukushima, sharply criticizing the government's role in ignoring the problem and shedding light on the vast ripple that the nuclear disaster has caused in the biggest of ponds. Regardless, the linear thinking about, quote, low levels and, quote, ignore the mountain scientific evidence about cumulative exposure to radioactive isotopes and other toxins and free radicals. What's interesting is how much different the same Ken Busela is portrayed in different mainstream media accounts, where sometimes only half of the message gets through. While the New Yorker pointed out the complexity of dealing with long-term health issues that could be connected to radiation via Ken's comments in 2015, quote, Is radioactive water worth worrying about? Whether any of this actually matters depends on whom you ask. Quote, there's a nuclear power side that's very quick to be dismissive and say, don't worry your pretty little heads. You're not in harm's way. End quote. Quote, Ken, a marine chemistry researcher and the organizer of Sampling Initiative, told me, quote, on the flip side are the people screaming, stay out of the Pacific, don't swim in Monterey, I'm going to move, tell your friends, this is a catastrophe, end quote. Quote, at the level detected in the Eucalypt, Ken has calculated you need to swim 6 hours a day for 1,000 years to get the radiation equivalent of a dental X-ray. The full impact of nuclear fallout, however, depends on more than becquerels, which merely count the number of times per second that an unstoppable atom somewhere in the sample fires off a particle. These particles are the differing amounts of energy with which they are ejected, have a wide range of effects on the body. We process cesium like an electrolyte, which means that it is diffused throughout the body and eventually excreted in urine. Half of the amount that is ingested is lost within a few months, which limits exposure. By contrast, strontium-90, another common component of nuclear waste, is a calcium-like, quote, bone seeker, end quote, that becomes concentrated in the skeleton and teeth. Since it stays there for years rather than months, even relatively low doses increase the risk of conditions such as bone cancer and leukemia. From a human health perspective, Ken sees potential strontium leak as far more worrying than a little cesium. So as far as nuclear waste goes, cesium-134 is not as bad as strontium-90. But that doesn't mean there are no harmful effects. And it doesn't mean that strontium isotopes aren't affecting the Pacific and West Coast as well, because it has been detected there, and more can be expected to be found. The biomagnification of the food chain, as low levels of radiation build up in lower life forms and in turn become consumed and often concentrated by higher life forms, will increase human exposure in ways that simple measures for exposure time simply do not account for. Its effects will be masked, but not impotent. What happens to a man and the environment when he is exposed to low levels of radiation over the decades and many years that make up his life? What about the impact on DNA through epigenetics? Science now know that gene expression is changed when it is exposed to dangerous materials in the body. The bluefin tuna that migrate from Japan to the west coast were found to contain radioactive particles. Again, via Ken, the mainstream media downplayed the risks, while alternative media sources sounded the alarm, something that shouldn't be happening, but is. All bluefin tuna off the west coast are radioactive. While the facts in the report remain the same, Forbes, among the other mainstream outlets, downplayed the perception of the problem and essentially given credence to that idea that there isn't a problem at all. And part of the downplaying stories were these two that follow. Fukushima radiation in the Pacific tuna is equal to 1/20th of a banana. And another disinformation article. Fukushima radiation may actually save bluefin tuna. And these were courtesy of Forbes. It wasn't until 2016, a full 5 years after the meltdown, that Japanese officials and in turn outlets like CBS News admitted there was indeed a cover-up and a concerted effort not to use branding and perception words like meltdown, even though one was underway. Fukushima meltdown apology. It was a cover-up. Latent diseases and disorders have a way of subtly cropping up, creating a silent genocide of worn-down people suffering from chronic diseases and inflammation that gives way to cancers, heart and brain diseases, autoimmune disorders and the like. That is the biggest risk that Fukushima still poses today. Ignored since after it happened in 2011, the authorities have finally officially acknowledged what they dared not admit since the cover-up began in the wake of the earthquake of the tsunami that crippled the nuclear power plant and began the long, slow poisoning of the Pacific Ocean and all the life that is sustained from it. This is a horror, and the mainstream media, as it is, with your interests above all others, has assured you that this ongoing disaster is nonetheless perfectly safe. Everything is fine. Back to your regular scheduled program. News report exposing cover-up of Fukushima proves conspiracy theorists right. And obviously this is a satellite image of the pollution radiating out of Fukushima. And guys, this is the perfect time that I'm going to be reading out this document, which has been composed by Jim Stone. And a lot of the information on this document was scrubbed and deleted from all internet sources, apart from they are unable to actually attack and take down his website and remove this. So you can still download this from the source, which is Jim Stone, his website, which I'll leave a link in the description. He starts off by saying, it took them 300 years and trillions of dollars to build a theatre of darkness, yet the light of only one match can burn it down. Do not let this light go out. Archive and post. 3/11 was Japan's 9/11. It's all documented, folks. This is Japan's 9/11, and it's all based on official records and evidence, which cannot be silenced. What is here is every bit as damning as Building 7 or 9/11, while being far more important, and the fact that a large portion of even the truth movement has shunned this report will show you just how deep the conspiracy goes. It is essential for people to link, repost, and mirror this report, because emails related to it will be censored and people will not find their way here from an email. It will also get deleted from sites like Above Top Secret and Godlike Productions, and therefore failure to spread the word through other means will give the elite an ability to create a similar disaster elsewhere, possibly near you. This report is public domain. Use anything here on your own site, but mention my name and link back to here so people can find the source. This printed version can be copied and handed out as you desire. Did the Dimona Dozen murder the Fukushima 50? Jim Stone, freelance journalist, reformatted for print on September 16th, 2013. The 3/11 earthquake, tsunami and nuclear disaster did not occur naturally. In this report, you will find all the evidence needed to support this claim and more. This is a vital report because it documents the dawning of a new type of environmental warfare in which advanced technologies are used to make unsuspecting populations believe their destruction occurred by the will of nature, thus leaving the destroyers in a position to demand governments stay silent while they perform the job of destroying or enslaving their populations to the will of the global elite. This environmental threat tactic, when coupled with industrial virus attacks and nuclear blackmail, is the new direction the elite has chosen to take warfare, now that false flag terror in the name of Arabs has failed to convince the world's populations that massive hot wars are needed. The key points this report covers to prove this tactic in use are: 1. Reactor 3 is completely missing, which means the press and anyone who has claimed anything about pressures, temperatures, contaminant, etc. at Reactor 3 after March the 14th, 2011 is lying, and people need to pay attention to it, because failure of the public to realise the massive extent of lies about what is going on there will leave the door open to a repeat event. Lies must be told to hide what really happened at Fukushima, because like false flag terror in the name of Arabs, once the secret about environmental terrorism and industrial warfare is known, its usefulness is minimised. A missing Reactor 3 proves the hydrogen explosion theory false, because all reactor engineers know that you cannot lose a reactor entirely absent having a massive explosion on the order of a nuclear weapon make it disappear. Yet Reactor 3 is indeed blown to smithereens, with the control rods and reactor guts laying out in the open in the outer containment structure, as shown in the picture below. Here we have Reactor 3's guts laying out in the open, with the core spray system still trying to function. Notice all the dust mixed up in the debris, dust which could never have happened from a mere hydrogen blast. A large portion of this dust is reactor core material as indicated by its colour, and the rest is concrete. It is important to know that it takes a detonation, supersonic explosion to create concrete into dust. And even under ideal conditions with a perfect oxygen-hydrogen mixture, an open-air hydrogen ignition never achieves the shockwave speed of detonation. The dust alone proves that something other than hydrogen did this. Number 2. Reactor 4 is Building 7, demolished by explosives. The biggest smoking gun proves the Fukushima disaster was in fact an act of war is the near mythically impossible destruction of Reactor 4, which imploded despite not having a core, and mysteriously as Building 7 fell on 9/11 despite never being hit by a plane. He has a note down here saying Reactor 4 is Building 7. It was disassembled for maintenance and exploded anyway. TEPCO said it was getting its internal shroud replaced. They did not lie. Dome is removed and the reactor is obviously empty. And a lot of these photos were actually taken from satellite imaging, which were then scrubbed from obviously the Google databases. Reactor 4 had been defueled and was undergoing replacement of its internal stainless steel shroud, yet according to the official story, blew its containment anyway. This is the final smoking gun. An empty reactor is inert and cannot produce any explosion, yet one happened at 4. That was so powerful it destroyed the structure, which had a frame consisting of solid steel columns, a minimum of 12 feet thick. The solid concrete and rebar walls on that frame, which were 4 feet thick, leaving it in danger of falling over. There is nothing short of a nuclear weapon that could blow a structure that strong to pieces. Demolition charges will not do it, absent occupying much of the interior space, which would have been obvious to workers. Unlike what some people have theorized, that the hydrogen overheated open fuel pools cannot produce hydrogen because the open fuel pool, the water boils off at 100 Celsius, and the hydrogen producing scenario requires water to be in pressurized form at 2000 degrees Celsius to liberate its hydrogen by losing its oxygen to the zircon cladding in the fuel rods. The entire hydrogen story needs the right environment to happen, and the environment requires temperatures of 2000 degrees Celsius, saturated steam, and thousands of psi inside a reactor to happen. This makes any explosion at Reactor 4, which was wide open and disassembled, flatly impossible. Knowing Reactor 4 could never have exploded because it was disassembled created a problem for the people fronting the environmental warfare scam, since it was impossible for Reactor 4 to explode while mothballed, a fact which would be easy for the public to grasp. An alternative explanation for the explosion at Reactor 4 was hatched by none other than Arnie Gunderson, who claimed a quote, prompt criticality, end quote, occurred in the fuel pool, which supposedly went off like a nuclear weapon, but the only few were the most ignorant in the population, because a nuclear weapon style, quote, prompt criticality, end quote, can happen only with nuclear material that is 70% enriched plutonium or 90% enriched uranium, and then only when a high precision explosive charge brings the material together in a calculated way at supersonic speeds. Even if the fuel in the pool was 90% enriched, the racks it is in and lacks of nuclear trigger to bring it all together correctly would have prevented any problem critically. Nuclear detonations are hard to accomplish, and they don't happen by accident. This report includes a background investigation by Arnie Gunderson, who is in fact not a nuclear expert of any sort, and proves he is a media fraud and paid government shill. Arnie has made a lot of money as a political tool and using the ignorance of nuclear topics in the general population to do damage to good people and firmly root the ability of the elite to carry out repeat attacks on facilities similar to Fukushima. This is accomplished by backstabbing the nuclear industry and pointing the finger in the wrong direction, away from the perpetrators. His consulting firm, quote, Fair Winds and Associates, end quote, was founded as a one-man show and remained that way for decades, with Arnie as the, quote, chief engineer, end quote, exaggerating and lying about his credentials, which was proven in my investigation of Arnie and Fair Winds. This investigation is included as an attachment to this report. Because Arnie's, quote, prompt criticality, end quote, was an easily proven fraud, and there was no way for Reactor 4 to explode, an alternative theory which involved backfeeding of hydrogen through a hard vent piping from Reactor 3 was hatched. Though hydrogen could have backfed from Reactor 3 in very small amounts under the most insanely poorly managed circumstances, the sheer force of the explosion at Reactor 4 alone proves the cause of that explosion was not hydrogen. Add to this the storyline that there was no power, no switches or relays creating sparks, and the hydrogen explosion theory becomes all the more ludicrous. It takes more than hydrogen to create an explosion. It takes an ignition source. And if we are to follow the official storyline about no power being available, the source of ignition simply did not exist in any of the 4 reactors. And here we have a couple of images, guys. This first arrow. This is the minivan I pasted on the containment wall. TEPCO stated that reactor 4 was defueled, had no core in it, and was undergoing replacement of the internal shroud. 1. The dome is in the service area with a jib from the service crane attached. You can look straight down the throat of the empty reactor. Something else blew this up. What did? This is Fukushima's Building 7, which collapsed at the World Trade Center on 9/11, even though nothing hit it. 3/11, 9/11, 4/11. See a pattern? And up over here, this hard vent stack is to get rid of hydrogen gas in an emergency. These were installed at the nuclear facilities after 3 Mile Island. Hydrogen did not cause these blasts. Here we have a large amount of fine concrete dust. Even when mixed with pure oxygen, hydrogen gas produces a non-ideal subsonic explosion. It takes a subsonic explosion to turn concrete into dust, which means an explosive device had to have done this. Down over here on this one, reactor 3 should be here. Where is it? A large amount of steam rises from the remains of reactor 3, proof of inner contaminant breach. Take a look at the minivan that was lying in the rubble. I took a minivan that was laying in the rubble and pasted it on top of the contaminant wall to show you how thick the concrete was. It takes a lot more than a conventional bomb to blow away walls that thick. If pictures this clear existed since 3/20/2011, why did they never show up in the mainstream press or even the alternative press other than this site? It's because they show a cold hard truth that cannot be denied. This was an act of war. Producing the report destroyed my life. I lost my business. I ended up on the run over this report. Several attempts on my life have been made, and I even got jailed twice. Yet this report is out there now, and it proves beyond all doubt that there is a rogue in the international community that will stop at nothing to get its way. Israel did this to Japan for 2 reasons. The first is because the culture was too hard to break, and the second is that Japan offered to enrich uranium for Iran. I predict that Japan is now finished. It's probably over for them. Reactor 4's dome was removed from defueling. Drone photos prove it. This dispels the rumours surrounding Unit 4's explosion. Some people have said that this reactor was secretly in operation to enrich plutonium. This photo proves it was disabled for shroud replacement as stated. TEPCO is going out of its way trying to explain the explosions, especially at Reactor 4, because they did indeed occur, so an explanation is needed. As a result, they are given reasons that cannot happen just to say something. They need to see this report and get the Arava perspective. Arava is a district surrounding Dimona, Israel. Smoke and gun proof, Reactor 4 was in cold shutdown when it exploded. The jib the service crane hooks up to is attached to the dome up here. 2. The bolts are removed. The dome is in the service area, as evidenced by the high-resolution photos. The reactor is obviously defueled, as stated by TEPCO. Brown's Ferry once again proved to be the valuable reference. Here, Brown's Ferry, Unit 1 dome, sits in the maintenance area during refueling, with the bolts hanging loose. Like Building 7 on 9/11, if there was ever a way to prove Fukushima was an act of war and not an accident, Reactor 4 is it. This is the biggest smoking gun at Fukushima that can be used to wake people up. You do not need to be any sort of expert to see that without a core, nothing can happen to a reactor other than willful destruction as an act of war. Attached to the end of this report is an additional article which shows that other nuclear facilities have been rigged to explode the way Reactor 4 did, with an example in Sweden. Number 3, that the destruction of reactors 3 and 4 is so severe it can only be accomplished with a nuclear weapon. Hydrogen gas produces a non-ideal subsonic explosion. It cannot turn concrete into dust. It can produce high pressures if sealed off. But the metal roof on all the reactor containments should have provided relief and been the only thing destroyed. It takes a high-intensity explosive to strip concrete off rebar. A blast wave, many times faster than supersonic. This means that whatever happened at Fukushima did not have blast characteristics that fit the quote official end quote story. If you missed it in the high-end resolution photo of the destroyed facility, I took a car that was laying around in the remains and placed it on top of one of the blown away walls at Reactor 3, which clearly gives the reference that the walls had support columns well over 12 feet thick. Fukushima Reactor 1 was assumed by many to have been built with a Mark I containment design, with the other reactors being Mark II by Ripley. The reactor engineer I interviewed, who designed Unit 3, stated that the Japanese were insanely cautious with nuclear and had the facilities and safety systems built far beyond GE specs. It is true that gas explosions can be very destructive, but only in facilities that were not designed to handle them. Even the basic Mark I containment, lacking Japan's upgrades, was many times beyond capable of withstanding the worst hydrogen blast. And when you see in the referenced photo that the walls indeed had solid steel columns over 12 feet thick, holding concrete 4 feet thick, it makes this point obvious. The nuclear weapons were placed inside the reactor containments, disguised as security cameras, installed under contract the year of the disaster by Arava-based security firm Magna BSP. Their security cameras weighed over 1,000 pounds and were the size and shape of gun-type nuclear weapons. Two diagrams of gun-type nuclear weapons show a striking similarity to Magna BSP cameras. Obviously you can pause it here, guys, and take a look. I hope you can make out the writing. Even at meltdown, a boiling water reactor cannot go critical like a nuke and will not explode. It just melts. The blast at Fukushima No. 3, which Israel firm Magna BSP secured with one of their cameras, bears a striking similarity to a nuclear weapon test. The reason Magna BSP gave for the odd shape, enormous weight and giant proportions of their cameras was that they were stereoscopic. A stereoscopic camera could be plausible at an airstrip where the camera would need depth perception of miles, but not indoors where focal lengths are short and the installation of one inside the inner containment of the Reactor 3 cannot be justified. Depth perception going out miles could also be accomplished with two separately mounted cameras weighing only a few pounds. The giant 1,000-pounder is a dead giveaway. Why this giant thing when smaller nukes are possible? Nuclear weapons always produce a certain amount of heat, and if a small design was used, it would be obvious the camera was warm, even when turned off and sitting on the shelf. This would cause questions to be asked, especially in a nuclear power facility. The enormous size and weight helped conceal the decay heat. The quake was not what we are told. In fact, the quake was a bold-faced lie, packing a political agenda. The proof goes beyond the linked Japanese chart. Please note the date listed at the top of this chart, linked at the end of this report, which contains all the seismic data from all reporting stations from the entire 3/11 earthquake, is the date of compilation. Japan has thousands of seismic stations run by numerous organizations, and they take time to merge into one final report. That is the date listed at the top of the linked compilation, March the 15th. And there is a shill out there who can't figure this out. A fact which should be obvious because the main seismogram in this report is dated and timed to the quake and is a match for the lower resolution seismograms in the large compilation. The online Fukushima report shows a video of what happened in the NHK newsroom during the quake. A few files fell over. The laser printer, which was not secured safe, stayed on its shelf, and people kept typing at their keyboards. If the quake was as represented in this chart, people would have been thrown upwards at 3 Gs of acceleration, which would have thrown them to the ceiling and would have been thrown towards the back of the room at the same time as 2 Gs of acceleration, smashing all of them and everything in this room against the back wall. There is a reason why this, quote, 9, end quote, quake killed no one inland from the tsunami, and it is because it simply did not happen. The following chart is from station MYG012, which is less than half a mile from NHK newsroom. The NHK newsroom video, which was shot within half a kilometre of the seismic station Erol Kalkan, used to produce this chart, proves the USGS lied. There was no 9. The USGS charts are phony, folks. That's all there is to it. Scroll down to the video of the quake represented in the above chart, which represents a 9 and was reportedly from a seismic station only half a mile away from where the video was shot. The implications of this run deep. The seismic chart, in conjunction with the newsroom's video, proves that the US government is also involved in the lie about the quake at some level. Since the video gets censored and deleted repeatedly from the YouTube because it proves the accuracy of this report, you might have to hunt for it. Some people keep typing on their computers as the quake happens. Also, note that most of the staff stays at the desks at the end. A laser printer is still sitting on a cheap table, etc. Some things fall, but most things return to normal quickly. All the while, the English announcer is reading a script of a devastation with all the pep of some paid fool who does not believe what he is saying in a cheesy infomercial. The quake was significant, but only in a sixth sense, as recorded by the Japanese seismographs, and faked to a 9 by the USGS. This is important footage because it proves that the earthquakes measured at 6.8 was an instrumentation. Confusion between the Shindo scale are being used to cover this up. Remember that this video is proof of what really went on. This means there never was significant aftershocks, never was a natural tsunami, and if they lied about that, what else? This video is pivotal and vital to exposing the truth. I choose this video because the newsroom is within eyeshot of station MYG012, which was used by the USGS to make these graphs, which represent an 8.8 at that station, as was stated in this English newscast, and was probably used as a guide to fudge the lie due to the closeness of the newsroom to the seismic station. The full USGS assessment of the Japan quake is in the appendix to this printed report. Of course, they offer no reading from MYG011, which was closest to the 9 epicenter by a long shot, because it only got a 5.63 worth of shaking. The map that confirms this is later in this report. Emails from Japan show the quake was not what we were told. Readers in Japan are well aware the quake was not a 9 and the tsunami was artificial. I received mails like this for a total of about 2 days before they were censored. Some of these messages are from the same people sending updates. My comments are in italics, writers' comments are in bold. Initial quake was reported at 7.2 epicenter in near Tohoku. This is what Japanese on the street were reading on their cell phones just after the event. Within 24 hours, the magnitude was increased to 8.8, 8.9, and then 9. It seemed the epicenter was under debate. My comment: the first magnitude and epicenter are calculated by computer. They are in fact always correct, unless there is a political need to move the epicenter and increase the magnitude. In this case, by about 100 times and 85 miles. Furthermore, the people in Japan are telling me directly, not Shindo. I have been checking USGS regularly and notice there are lots of depth 10 kilometer quakes. The 311 and the 411 both are depth 10 kilometers. Do you have any idea what that means? Scalar weapon, HARP, or just a coincidence? My comment: quakes do not appear over broad regions at 10 kilometer depth with consistency. So this does indeed point to the use of some sort of earthquake machine, as referred to by Defense Secretary Cohen during a military briefing in 1997. This is linked to in the Fukushima report. Last year, I came back to Fukushima from US. The reason is another story. Then I realized that there were lots of small quakes occurred around that area. In February, there were 2 bigger quakes there. Then I wondered why. It should not have occurred there, right? And 411, it was exactly 1 month later there was a 7.1 quake. My comment: she is referring to the fact that the Japanese know where the main seismic areas are, and that the quakes are occurring in areas where geology does not support the likelihood. March the 9th, early afternoon. I was in the doctor's office with my dad, who was in a wheelchair. I was standing. Then I felt dizziness. I looked up to the ceiling and found things were swaying. Nobody said it was a quake. I would explain it as standing on a big wobbly top. It was slow and not vertical nor horizontal. It was 7.4. My comment: if no one said it was a quake and the Japanese are familiar with quakes, what was this motion then, which caused a seismic reading of 7.4? I believe now that the earthquake machine places stress on a region with a circular pull, thus creating the spinning top feeling, to pull at potential weak spots in all directions, with the hope of triggering something big. This mail came in later from the same woman. Hi James, did you get 2 mails yesterday? This morning we got 6.7 quakes again. It was weird motion. My comment: Japanese know what a normal quake is. This came in from someone else who has lived in Japan for 17 years. This is about the same event. One thing I remember, the first bump on the 9th, I was sitting in an office full of Japanese. I said, "Jishing, earthquake." They said, "No, it isn't," but it was just a kind of rolling motion. My comment: the Japanese know what a normal quake is, and specifically said it was not a quake after feeling it. This measured a 7.4 Richter. So what moved the ground? So much it measured a 7.4, and the Japanese did not call it a quake. Yes, gooey is a good description. I have lived here for 17 years and felt every sort of quake, but never gooey, liquid quakes. Many people suffered nausea and symptoms of vertigo, disorientation for many weeks. I noticed that when I took a bath, I was afraid to do this. The water was vibrating in the tub, constant vibration. I could see this in my fish tanks too. Thank you for correlating all this. My comment: constant vibration. Earthquakes start and finish. What is this constant vibration going on in Japan now? Unverified rumour has it that Japan was threatened in 2009 to disband its government bank and let foreigners take over their finances, or America would use its earthquake machine to punish them. Constant vibration. You bet an electronic circuit can just be left on. Believe it or not, I happened to be in Osaka. We're very close to Kobe. When the earthquake hit, how lucky am I, right? Kobe earthquake was big and 311 was bigger, but not more than 100 times bigger. You are right. Japanese cell phones got an IM saying it was 7.2 Richter. Kobe was only 6.9. Chemtrail, it was calm and warm for March. But after the quake, the sky changed into grey and snowed and the temperature dropped. Next morning, the sky was beautiful and blue. I enjoyed looking up, but I saw a plane flying lower with chemtrail. After a while, I saw several chemtrails, and the sky turned grey, and temperature dropped again. Real-time video of the tsunami was playing in railway stations and other public locations, gave the whole thing a Hollywood-quality surreal. My response: the only way for real-time video to happen was if they knew the event was going to happen. Another smoking gun. Another odd thing, this on NHK, and right after the quake, a very studious piece about how the Tohoku quake differed from Kobe. Many doctors, emergency workers interviewed, and they were perplexed because it seemed that recent earthquake protocols had been based on the Kobe disaster, and all of these people were prepared to treat certain kinds of injuries, like what happens when victims are crushed. The doctors on the show remarked that the only injuries they were seeing had to do with the tsunami, e.g. immersion in water, near drowning, hypothermia from immersion in water. They were not treated classic earthquake injuries. My response: no traditional earthquake injuries equals no traditional earthquake, period. One more thing, the Japanese talked a lot about the dimension of a tsunami, and actually witnesses, survivors from Fukushima, said there were 7 tsunamis, not one, just rolling one after another. My response: this gives credence to those who claim more than one nuke was used, a possibility I ignored earlier entirely. Well, the size of these things in certain places were 39 meters, measured by large boats sitting on top of our land masses. What produces waves of this height? You are right in all your observations that there was little damage to wood stucco homes. These things are built to fall down. They didn't. You are obviously right in pointing this out. My response: first of all, a measurement of a tsunami based upon where a large boat ended up is far more accurate than any other measurement. The tsunami was 115 feet in some areas. Second, wooden Japanese homes are not built to American standards because the attitude to wood structures is that they are disposable. They are cheaply made and intended to be torn down after 25 years. I have confirmed they are made out of wood. A 39-meter tsunami is 115 feet tall. A 115 feet tsunami would need an earthquake over a 9 to do it, yet no damage to even cheap homes designed to be torn down after temporary use. A total inconsistency with the official story. And I never heard of the tsunami being that big, but the Japanese ought to know. They were there. Thank you for your hard work to get the truth out. I asked one individual directly if they could confirm the rumours that the Israelis were ready ahead of time with relief efforts, with 300 trucks, and if they could confirm the rumours that the Israelis controlled all relief efforts. She said he noticed a strong Israeli presence, enough to appear, quote, very interested, end quote, but could not confirm other points. Israelis, a big medical team came with lots of equipment and went to the north. They left those equipments as a gift for evacuees. I thought it was very interesting, so I remembered it, but I didn't hear the 300 truck story. This following comment confirms my 3 seismograms, which show 2 quake events to the north, which she felt, and 1 to the south, which she did not. This is a pretty good proof that the quake was indeed not natural. All 3 peak readings were blamed on the same phony, quote, epicenter, end quote, by the USGS. For reference, see the seismograms in the Fukushima report. The one, it lasted more than 5 minutes. I timed it, so it is not how I felt. According to the mass media, there were 3 big quakes happened at the same time. I felt at least 2 peaks. My response: the seismograms ran for 6 minutes. 6 is a key elite number. I doubt it is a coincidence. 6 is unrealistically long for a natural quake, regardless of magnitude. I can tell you that when you get on a plane to go to CA on the 18th, the ground at the airport was liquid. Everything was moving. It took me 4 days in CA to recover my equilibrium. If that starts up again, I am out of here. Too creepy. By the way, there are clips on YouTube in which a local gaijin personality references conversation with a Japanese finance minister, describes being threatened by the US with earthquakes. I would not assume this is purely an Israeli job, though Israel may be fronting it. There is the Iran question, but also Japan has been making reapproachments towards China for several years. The emperor is said to travel regularly to Beijing. I can think of lots of reasons the US would not want a strong Sino-Japanese alliance. In truth, both countries are scared shitless about a US default on debt. I can see why they would wish to consider how they might jointly respond to this. My friends and I have bet as to who will blow Israel off the map, and the smart money says China. Now the story develops. Interesting stuff. Quote, blowing Israeli off the map, end quote, would be counterproductive because it is merely a sock puppet of the Rothschilds. Ignore the puppet. Look towards the banking district of the City of London. I would bet Israeli behaviour would be a lot better if someone was not pulling their strings. My thanks to the people in Japan who sent me these emails. Certainly, there were more I never got. It blows me away to think such hard work would be done to stop the dissemination of a truth so essential. I challenge anyone to send me pictures of this quake showing me devastation in an area not hit by the tsunami. What everyone failed to notice: absolutely no quake damage on anything as a tsunami rolls in. This tsunami was nuclear. Our Illuminati, Zionist, fascist, quote, perception management, end quote, press told no one about this crime scene. You can bet the Japanese government has a knife to its throat keeping it quiet. Writes on this image here: no damage to wooden homes. No quake damage to concrete. See anything other than a tsunami? Not the clearest frame, but still no quake damage. I ask you to ponder these images. If you are in doubt, look for quake damage. Why is there none? Not even a little. This was upgraded to a 9.1, folks. Yet it is obvious nothing happened along the coast of Japan until the tsunami arrived. Look at these pictures of the Kobe quake at 7.2. Japan is not earthquake proof. Their staff falls down like anyone else when the going gets rough. A 9 is at least a 7, 1,000 kilometers across. Look for other answers. You have been lied to. We always eat the lies, like 4 years old, forever trusting a parent to tell the truth. We need to grow up as a society and figure out that mummy just might be evil, and search for the lie in everything. Why on earth would they lie about even this? All we have, all the pictures are tsunami damage. Let's see pictures of a quake damage. Images of the Kobe quake lay the scam bare and prove a cold hard reality. Even with excellent construction, Japanese buildings will fall down during a serious earthquake. There was nothing magical about Japanese buildings that make them capable of surviving a 9. And the fact that nothing collapses in Sendai proves the quake did not happen, as stated by the USGS or Zionist media. The only honesty came from the Japanese seismograms, which proves something is seriously amiss in the political sphere. Japanese seismologists have possession of the records and reported the truth, yet even the Japanese media is not telling the truth to the Japanese people. And obviously, guys, this is a 7 earthquake. So he's quite right. Those wooden constructed houses would have easily been ripped down. These photos of Kobe say it all. Why, with a quake well over 100 times as large, did nothing? Answer: the quake as presented is a lie. Try to find a photo of seismic damage in Sendai. I challenge you. Try to find it in any of the coastal cities as little as 25 miles from the epicenter. I looked for 5 hours and except for some tanks that fell at a brewery, not a single one exists. No pictures of collapsed skyscrapers or high-rises equals no 9. I'm just going to skip a few pages over to this one because it's a very long document. So we go straight over to, I honestly believe Japan is being held a nuclear hostage. It all makes sense. Japan offers to enrich uranium for Israelis. Great Satan, Iran. 1A. Updated information indicates that Japan was being held under threat to hand over trillions of yen to the World Bank and refused. I now believe that this was the primary motivation behind why the quake was perpetrated and Fukushima was destroyed. The Zionists wanted to prove to Japan just how dirty they would be if Japan did not pay a ransom so high it would effectively enslave the Japanese people. And shortly after the disaster, Japan suddenly announced a huge payment to the World Bank to, quote, end world poverty, end quote, out of the blue. Good people they are, those Japanese, to destroy their economic future with such a voluntary action. 2. Immediately, Israel sets up front companies masquerading as security companies, and one of them succeeds in getting a security contract at a Japanese nuclear facility. 4 months later, the Dimona Dozen shows up, and under the cover of the security contract gets unlimited access to the heart of Fukushima. They plant the virus, instill real cameras outside the facility, and functional poorly disguised nuke cameras inside the facility. In addition to this, they install an unauthorized data connection to allow control of all the guts of the facility via the virus. They admitted to this connection, as discussed later on this page. 3. After installing Stuxnet and the nukes, they scram. 4. Israel waits for one of the many natural quakes in Japan to provide cover for the tsunami bomb, and they already have it at the bottom of the Japanese trench. VLF communications are established with a bomb to penetrate the water. David in Dimona gets seismic reading from Japan, 6.67 in progress. Boom! New evidence shows the quake most likely was not natural. Tsunami comes in. Swamps, Stuxnet, infected power plant. Direct video feed from legitimate cameras security company installed gets a David via totally unauthorized channel. And David knows just when to cut the generators off. Others on the team do all they can to counteract measures taken by the employees at Fukushima, who are unaware an attack is taking place and do not understand why everything is going crazy. 5. Israeli Prime Minister calls Japan and says, take that for offering help to Iran. And you know, there are 5 more nukes in the ocean off the coast of Japan, and we are going to set these off and destroy your coastal cities if you do not forget that 6.67 and say it was a 9 to cover for the tsunami effects. And now we are going to make your people demand you move away from nuclear power so you can never threaten us like that again. We are blowing up Fukushima, Daiichi, and you are going to go along with whatever story we tell you to. So there. 6. David and his pals close all valves to the reactors via the remote data link they admitted to installing and put them on full throttle to melt them down while the virus keeps control room readouts displaying false info, like nothing is going on even though the place is coming apart. After enough mayhem ensues to provide plausibility, they set off planted nukes and blow the place sky high. Though I have yet to work out the final details, I probably have enough to hang them before. 1. I got the real seismic data that proves beyond doubt that the quake is not what we were told and was in fact an inland 6.8, calculated higher than the seismogram due to the triangulated true epicenter being a little higher, which would get noticed but not feared in quake-ridden Japan. 2. Numerous reference sources prove Stuxnet really was written by Israel. 3. Japan really did offer to enrich uranium for Iran and really did refuse to do a huge banker bailout. Israel has been documented to have attempted to destroy a reactor in Iran and probably did. Japan, contributing to Iran's nuclear future, would make them just as much an enemy to Israel as Iran, and not sucking up to a banker threat the way America did would cause the Zionists to slate the economy the size of Japan's for destruction. Israel would want them taken out. Now all the economic news coming out of Japan is over how bad their economy now is, when prior to the quake it was golden. No key manufacturing got destroyed by the quake. Why suddenly poof, economy down the toilet? It's because the enormous debt Japan now must pay bankers to, quote, end world poverty, end quote. Why would a nation do that to their economy in the tank anyway? 4. It is documented that a team from Israel with a history consisting only of work in Israeli defense got unlimited access to a Japanese nuclear facility, which then went boom. 5. Reactor 4 had been defueled and proven disassembled, and therefore no explosion there was possible. What should have happened at Reactor 4? If anything at all, the fuel pools should have melted down and caught fire once the water boiled off from lack of recirculation at worst, and badly contaminated the containment structure. Nothing else. No explosions. Nothing else. Reactor 4 is Building 7, period. Why did an explosion there happen that was so severe it blew the outer containment walls 4 feet thick and inner containment walls that were much thicker? Reactor 4 is reportedly now in danger of falling over. How? 6. The Japanese government is going along with the story of a scientifically proven false 9. There is a reason, and my guess is that Israel made threats to wipe out Japanese coastal cities with additional tsunamis if the government of Japan speaks a word of what went on. There should be no reason for the Japanese to go along with this other than to continued threat. Is it not interesting this quake reportedly happened at the bottom of the Japanese trench, which does not produce significant quakes, and would be perfect for hiding an atomic bomb blast? If detonated at the bottom of the Japanese trench, a nuke could create an empty underwater dome of completely displaced water 6 kilometers tall and 12 kilometers across without ever breaching the surface. That would produce an epic tsunami, all the while surface effects remained, for the most part, hidden, with absolutely no scientific quake damage in Sendai. A very large megaton range subsea nuclear detonation remains the best explanation for the tsunami. Is the Department of Homeland Security trying to keep American industries and nuclear facilities in the dark about Stuxnet? After Fukushima fell victim to unwary operators, I would think such a conference would be a top priority here. The genie is out of the bottle. It is a fact that the writers of Stuxnet intend to use it, so cancelling a well-researched conference about the vulnerabilities of the Siemens SCADA system to Stuxnet in the name of, quote, keeping hackers from getting info, end quote, seems to me like an effort to keep the threat alive. Ignore the fluff at the beginning and read about, quote, takedown con, end quote, summary near the bottom. This is serious. NSS researchers' presentation at TakedownCon security conference cancelled at the 11th hour. Researchers cancelled SCADA hacking presentation after Department of Homeland Security ICS CERT and Siemens raised concerns. May the 19th, 2011. And this is the area he was describing. About TakedownCon. TakedownCon is a new technical IT security conference series that provides advanced, highly technical research, presentations, and training to accomplished information security professionals. Developed by EC Council, it debuts in 2011 with 2 conferences in Dallas and Las Vegas. TakedownCon focuses on technical research in cutting-edge exploits and vulnerabilities, and also provides EC Council certification training, including the renowned Certified Ethical Hacker CEH program, a recently accepted certification of DoD Department of Justice Directive 8570.01M Change 2. Website is www.takedowncon.com. I fear by the time the hacker halted conference happens in October, the summer of disaster may have passed, and if it has not, I bet any discussion at Stuxnet and Hacker Halted will also be cancelled. Stuxnet is too good a toy for a very powerful group to let go. Something is fishy here. Other publications picked up the story now and are poo-pooing the issue into the ground. They are obviously attempting to morph responsibility from Stuxnet style attacks away from Israel so they can regain cover and use the weapon as a false flag tool to destroy internet freedom. This is where they are going with this. Count on it. And when the disasters happen, they will be a cozy blanket of lies shielding Israel from all blame. Never forget, this is their baby. Prior to them doing this, we never heard of it. About, quote, prompt criticality, end quote. As it turns out, Arnie Gunderson, Mr. quote, prompt criticality, end quote, with regard to the massive explosion at number 3 is very poorly credentialed. His crowning achievement was playing with a 100-watt open water tank reactor in a classroom for a short period of time. The following quotes used to spice this section are from other nuclear engineer postings to atomicinsights.com. Fuel rods are only 20% fusionable, sometimes even less, and until you reach over 90% purity in U-238 and about 70% purity in plutonium, no prompt criticality is possible in any case, no matter how much of it you have laying around. Furthermore, even with 100% pure material, you need a precise trigger, slamming or crushing material together to get a detonation. Even if 100% pure material is slammed together at high speed, if it is not done right, you will get only a nuclear splatter that pushes the pieces apart and no detonation. Nukes are hard to do. Why have so many of us seem to have forgotten that nuclear detonations are hard to accomplish? The prompt criticality in spent fuel story is something I would have expected to hear from an Ewok praying to a gold robot. I can't believe even a scammer would have the guts to suggest it, let alone allow it to be spread in his name. For an explanation for this explosions, just look at the cameras the Demona dozen brought in. If someone is waving a degree as anchor for this, quote, prompt criticality, end quote, bull hockey, remember that there is such a thing as a paper-trained idiot. And if you look into Gunderson's background, you will discover he is barely that. With his only hands-on experience outside a classroom, being an intern at a nuclear facility 2 years before he got his degree. If the mainstream media wanted facts, why did they pick this guy? Because he said what they wanted, truth be damned. Arnie Gunderson consulting firm, which has only him, no employees, and even therefore is easy to be senior engineer, was curiously founded within 3 months of the release of the Spider-Man villain, Critical Mass, who as Spider-Man's 4th grade classmate went by the name of Arnie Gunderson. Critical Mass had the ability to project explosions from his fingertips. Perhaps that gave birth to the prompt criticality in a 20% fuel pool when 90+% is needed for an explosion of any sort, no matter what the circumstance. If you need 90 or more percent and you have only 20%, the laws of physics will be obeyed. Folks, in perfect form, the scamming media hunted out a fraud and rammed him down your throats. I firmly believe Arnie Gunderson has a phony company and was inspired in his fraud by a Spider-Man comic. The date of the creation and the publishing of the villain, quote, critical mass, end quote, precedes the creation of Arnie's company, Fairwinds and Associates, by only 2 months. I believe it is coincidental, and when it comes down to the Associates part of his company, they do not exist. Nowhere has a classmate come forward claiming to have known him in college. And with his stupidity regarding, quote, prompt criticality in a few pool, I doubt he has a degree at all. The article about virus attack on Fukushima follows. The following section covers the Fukushima disaster from a technical perspective, published April the 29th, 2011. Fukushima was impossible. The swamping of the generators by a tsunami is irrelevant, because the real emergency backup systems are driven by steam from the reactor themselves and require no electricity at all to function. No electricity is needed to operate 3 separate emergency systems at each reactor, each of which will keep a reactor safe even if only one works. Interesting it is then that all 9 non-electrical backup systems across the 3 fueled reactors failed. This is technically impossible outside a windfall intent, and was likely the result of Stuxnet's virus attack. An article from the Telegraph. Israeli security chief celebrates Stuxnet's cyber attack. A showreel played at a retirement party for the head of the Israeli Defense Forces has strengthened claims the country's security forces was responsible for a cyber attack on the Iranian nuclear program. Stuxnet was designed specifically to target Siemens SCADA controllers and is almost effective at tampering with fluid control systems of the type that Fukushima used for emergency security. The centrifuges it attacked in Iran were ideal. So are the fluid control systems at the nuclear facility. Oil refineries are equally at risk. Stuxnet is most dangerous when affecting a system which needs to control the flow of any liquid, be it hydraulic for cooling or combining chemicals. Stuxnet is documented to have been produced by the Israeli Defense Forces for the purpose of destroying any industrial system that can be destroyed by improper fluid flow. The following articles, which document the creation of Stuxnet, can be downloaded in full by typing the URLs embedded in this screen capture. And again, that's the embedded up there. The video of Lieutenant General Gabi Askenzi's operational success included references to Stuxnet, a computer virus that disrupted the Natanz nuclear enrichment site last year. Although Israel has not officially accepted responsibility for the Stuxnet attack, evidence of its role has been mounting since it was first discovered last July. The virus, unprecedented in its sophistication, was designed to infiltrate the control systems at Natanz and make hidden, damaging adjustments to virtual centrifuges. Israeli general boasts authoring Stuxnet's virus, 22nd of the 2nd, 2011. The British newspaper Telegraph and Le Monde France refer to an article published in the Israeli daily Haaretz, according to which a general in the army of the country has confirmed the authorship of the Stuxnet worm. Magna BSP, a Dimona-based company with no history outside the IDF, contracts prior to Fukushima, a suspiciously short domain history despite a 10-year claimed history. Magna BSP had a full-time internet-linked two-way connection to the Fukushima reactor rooms all the way through the disaster. They told TEPCO about that connection on May the 15th after everything blew sky high via an article printed in the Jerusalem Post. Israeli firms' cameras recorded Japanese nuclear core. As the world continues to gaze with concern at Japan's Fukushima nuclear power plant, high-tech security cameras installed by an Israeli defense firm are recording events at the troubled core from an insider's vantage point. The Arava-based Magna BSP company, which specializes in producing and installing stereoscopic, sensory and thermal imaging cameras, had been contracted to place cameras around one of the plant's 6 cores. Why did Magna BSP wait until everything was blown sky high to tell TEPCO the data link existed, and then did not tell them face to face? I find it hard to believe that TEPCO would have not been interested in viewing a reactor that was about to explode. It seems impossible that TEPCO would not have wanted to view the reactor and probably did not ask because the link was kept a secret. It is a simple fact that internet connections are never allowed inside a reactor's containment. The connection was mentioned in the Jerusalem Post after the destruction was finalized. And as another side note, If Fukushima really was without power, as stated in the mainstream media, how did Magna BSP's cameras and associated computer hardware keep running all the way through the disaster, as this article states? The following article clearly shows I am not the only one suspecting Stuxnet at Fukushima. Japan's nuclear crisis, Stuxnet and SCADA defences. March the 20th, 2011. The devastation in Japan caused by the recent earthquake and tsunami is truly heart-wrenching, especially when one considers how millions of lives can be turned upside down in the matter of a few minutes. In no way is this article intended to draw any attention away from the plight of the people now suffering in the earthquake's aftermath, as our concern should be for them first and foremost. With that caveat aside, I believe we can use the events that are unfolding in Japan as a learning opportunity regarding the possible consequences of a sophisticated Stuxnet-type attack against SCADA networks at nuclear facilities. Stuxnet is a highly sophisticated designer virus that wreaks havoc on SCADA systems, which provide operational control for critical infrastructure and production networks such as those used to operate a nuclear power plant. This type of viruses are uniquely dangerous because they are capable of not only affecting network computer systems, they can also cause actual physical damage to the equipment the networks control. Specifically damaged equipment at Iran's Natanz uranium-enriched facility, which reportedly set back the nation's nuclear program 7 years. From what I understand of the current crisis in Japan, the problems of the nuclear facility did not stem from the reactors themselves, sustaining significant damage in the earthquake. Instead, the problem with the reactor cores overheating was caused by a disruption to the power and water supplies that are needed for the cooling systems. The problem was compounded by the destruction of the backup generators for the cooling system pumps in the subsequent tsunami. In the past, the majority of these systems are operated manually or by analog control systems like electromechanical relays, but that is changing. Stuxnet has two modes, random and administrative. It can be administrated to optimize the damage and can also transmit setup information and industrial system information to a remote computer. Once installed on the host system via a flash drive, it causes that system to violate its normal security protocols, and internet administration becomes possible if a connection exists. Tampering is not visible on the control room readouts because Stuxnet learns what, quote, normal, end quote, looks like and keeps the temperature, pressure and other readouts within normal limits so that the operators are oblivious to the destruction happening in secret. Stuxnet appeared in Japan in June 2010, shortly after Magna BSP arrived. Remote administration mode can be adjusted on demand to suit any need. No doubt the people at Fukushima sat there in idle mode thinking all was well until something screamed or went boom, and at that point it would be too late to do anything other than cry. I did not catch this in the original report, but I now believe Stuxnet was first tested in America. The following article makes a compelling case for this possibility. Tuesday, May the 22nd, 2007. SCADA, quote, data storm, end quote, shuts down Browns Ferry nuclear power plant. As one commentator so adaptly stated recently, paraphrased, unlike the majority of humanity, submariners must run towards danger as quickly as possible. While it is in human nature to scatter in the face of danger, submariners understand better than most that everything, mission success, preservation of the platform and of course crew lives, depends upon quite the reverse. See the actual quote in the note below. Have terrorists or hackers uncovered a major flaw in our nation's nuclear power plants? If verified publicly, Browns Ferry would become the first solid case of direct internal manipulation of a critical infrastructure control system. In other words, either hackers or terrorists caused a critical system to be overloaded, shutting down the reactor. This sounds alike, called SCADA, is in the realm of digital data supervision, computers and programmed logical controllers. The term refers to a large-scale distributed instrument control system. One potential flaw is the mistaken belief that SCADA networks are disconnected from the internet and are therefore secure. Hardware for SCADA systems is ruggedized to withstand temperature, vibration and voltage excursions, and reliability is further enhanced by redundant hardware and communication channels. The calculated mean time before system failure and such high reliable systems is commonly measured in centuries, not years. This incident happened in August of 2006 at Unit 3. Has our mainstream US press been AWOL? Here is more, published Monday the 21st of May 2007, from our neighbours in the UK. It seems that the US House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security called this week for the Nuclear Regulators Commission, the NRC, to further investigate the cause of excessive network traffic that shut down an Alabama nuclear plant. If you're like me, you probably believe Alabama is part of the US, not the UK. Someone is in deep doo-doo. Who do you think the event will be blamed upon? Hint, Charlie is usually correct, with the proviso that the public blame may not reflect the true case. 1. A teenage hacker. 2. Al-Qaeda cell. 3. A contractor. With a side note, correct, most likely default of Homeland Security bureaucrats. 4. A design engineer. 5. Mechanical fluke. I am a lifer in the types of control systems Fukushima and its clone, TVA-owned Browns Ferry, have both been upgraded to modern Siemens controllers running the Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition (SCADA) system. Stuxnet was designed to attack. Upgrades are the norm in the major facility. On many blogs, people say the controls were old and therefore Stuxnet immune. They are out of touch or have no knowledge of the industrial control system. I actually ferreted it out, and I will now explain in detail why the problems before the explosion had to be sabotaged. The diesel generators were not out in the open, as we were led to believe. They were in fact located in the basement of the turbine building, which was sealed off and never significantly flooded. One of them stayed running the entire time, but the electrical switchgear attached to it disconnected for an unexplainable reason, which made it useless. Each of the backup generators at Fukushima were capable of running 14,000 households each, which means they had to be over 10 megawatts each. It is obvious then that the Fukushima was set up to survive on only one of 13 backup generators, and one did keep running. One would be many times larger than needed to run last-ditch backup systems at all reactors, but would not keep business as usual. But this is not the real story, which is that even others which were high and dry stopped as well. I hypothesize that the one running generator was kept as a lone reserve, never hooked up to the SCADA control. Why did the switchgear disconnect? A working generator. This is the type of thing Stuxnet was designed to do. On top of these things, emergency reactors arrived on the scene within 9 hours before anything bad happened at all, but were not able to provide power because the switchgear would not allow them. The World Nuclear Association did a beautiful report about what happened at the Fukushima and then got co-opted by dark forces. I'm keeping the key content of their original report preserved in this one. The World Nuclear Association got taken over, their report destroyed, and also expunged from the Wayback Machine. This Fukushima report you are reading now is all that remains as a solid reference to the original World Nuclear Association report. Obviously, the Zionist scammers could not have the truth left anywhere intact. The following screen captures are from the first page of the hacked report, where the World Nuclear Association is now saying no one at all died at the Fukushima, and from another nuclear organisation that has not been taken over. A minimum of 3 people died at Fukushima, documenting even one destroys the World Nuclear Association in its current form. The original World Nuclear Association report contained the following points. 1. The generators never got submerged. You have to connect the dot between them being in a contained area and the tsunami therefore not being able to get to them. Some water got into one of the turbine buildings, where several were located and flooded the lowest point in that building to a depth of 4 feet, which means that even if the generators were on the floor at the lowest point, they likely would not have been swamped because they are too big. The water would not get past the footings. Perhaps a 1 megaton generator would have swamped, certainly not one of the big diesels, which were, according to this report, enough to run 14,000 homes each. In addition to this, there were several generators in a second location that never got flooded at all. One of these generators kept running but was not able to get power into the facility because of the switchgear prevented it. 2. You have to have watched the robot video, which clearly shows the switchgear that malfunctioned after the tsunami never got wet. There was a non-tsunami reason for the failure. Also, look at the high-resolution photos referenced below. There is no switchgear for the diesel generators outside the facility. It is all indoors, in areas higher than the water got. Remember that there was no emergency when this off-site generators arrived, which means that they could work efficiently to get things up and running. With my experience in this area, assuming it did get soaked, a complete replacement of high-capacity switchgear should only take an afternoon if done with an emergency. A truck-mounted crane or a forklift does all the heavy lifting, and the stuff is modular. In the event, in every major facility there are spares galore. It is not that hard to make the terminations. A worst-case scenario could have been addressed before things went horribly awry. That is, unless a virus did not let the new switchgear activate either. It would take days to conclude a virus was messing things up. You would not expect that. I'm sure there is a lot we never heard about. 3. The batteries held at all reactors, in contrast to the lies in the destroyed report, leaving only an hour gap in time where there was no power present to run these before adequate off-site power drove into the facility on the road all nice and ready to hook up, but was denied by the switchgear, which this report says was swamped, but that is likely an assumption because swamped switchgear could have been replaced even before the batteries died. The fact that the off-site generators were able to be driven into the facility also proves that other lies told about the earthquake in general, employees leaving only to find cracks in the road so bad they had to walk home. Why? Why lie like this? At least this report has some modicum of honesty. 4. You have to look at the chart that shows the thermal output of the reactor 8 hours after the earthquake, which is when the batteries running the electrical cooling pump died, and the output at that time was less than 20 megawatts from each reactor, which means they would not have had troubles before the off-site generators were hooked up to restore power if it was not denied by what I suspect was Stuxnet infected switchgear. In fact, they would never have had serious troubles at all, beyond having to be vented. The real critical time is in the first 3 hours after shutdown. 5. Reactor 3 exploded entirely, yet this reactor had the most functional backup system. At least the original report said the explosion remains, quote, unexplained, end quote. Perhaps those who wrote the report should take a look at this for the answer. 6. Reactors are stated to be a, quote, early 1960s design, end quote, apparently to mislead people into believing that they were outdated even when installed. This is not the case. Their design was an early 60s concept, but in fact a late 60s design, and since installation took years, what more could you expect in the early 70s? The reactors were in fact a very safe design. This report at least states that the facility was very well updated. Identical reactors at TVA-owned Browns Ferry have been certified safe and licensed to operate through the year 2035. These reactors were also converted over to run the Siemens SCADA system. The reactors at Fukushima were not garbage. The fastest cars in production still function on a late 1800s concept. I hypothesize that the situation at Fukushima is not being properly assessed by facility controllers because Stuxnet is still giving false readings to the control panels, readings which obviously have been false because they show containment pressure when confidential leaked photographs prove beyond a doubt no contaminant exists at all. At Reactor 3, there is not even a reactor there, and I have a perfect explanation for why Reactor 3 is still showing up on the control room readouts. Nuclear Association report was perfectly accurate with regard to Reactor 3 containment. Perhaps the people who wrote that report have not actually looked at the facility or seen the confidential photos, and instead relied on information from Stuxnet infected instrumentation. Each reactor has 8 separate emergency backup systems, each capable of saving the reactor on its own. 3 are designed to function perfectly if all power is lost and even the generators fail. Fukushima did not need any electrical systems operating at all to keep itself from blowing up. When power is lost, steam from the reactors is automatically diverted from the generator turbines to two totally separate steam turbines, connected to totally separate water pumps needed. A historical perspective of Fukushima shows the hydrogen blasts were bogus. Hydrogen blasts could not have damaged Fukushima so badly. This is a media-fed lie. So over here, the crane rails provide a fixed reference that would remain the same despite Japanese enhancements to the facility. Japan had these built stronger than the specs, so the concrete went higher than the standard diagram. From the position of the crane rails, we can determine that the top portion of the reactor at Unit 3 is completely gone. The reality is corroborated by other photos included in the original Fukushima report. Crane rails have to be here, which means a lot of the top of the structure is gone. Top of the reactor. According to Israel News sources, the cameras were placed inside this chamber. Reactor 3 is beyond all doubt completely gone. That cannot happen by accident. The only way you can completely vanish a reactor is with a nuclear weapon. There is simply nothing in any arsenal outside of a nuke that could do it. I believe Magna BSP had a nuclear weapon hidden in one of their unrealistically giant cameras, which were installed inside the Reactor 3 containment. The two towers in the foreground were installed after 3 Mile Island, where a core meltdown caused hydrogen venting and a subsequent hydrogen burn. These towers were installed at many nuclear facilities to vent hydrogen and prevent explosions after a core meltdown. This makes the hydrogen story at Fukushima very implausible. When the hydrogen ignited at 3 Mile Island, no damage of any sort happened to the reactor, equipment or building. At Fukushima, we got a mushroom cloud. Figure the odds. Since a reactor is completely incapable of going supercritical, even in full meltdown, and hydrogen caused no damage to another facility, even when ignited after a meltdown, what could cause a mushroom cloud? I believe we are lied to. The Japanese were lied to. All nations were lied to. It's the only thing that makes sense. The liars are the same people who own the media, which is fairly well understood as a lie factory. If you go to war, control of information is everything. It is so evident what happened here, but most people believe Osama died in 2011. The obvious slips past most people. We were lied to about Fukushima and will continue to be lied to. 3 Mile Island sits in the evidence pool against what we have been told about Fukushima. History does matter. These are diagrams of gun-type nuclear weapons, in comparison to one of the cameras Magna BSP brought into Fukushima. To give you an idea of how big the reactors at Fukushima were, take a look at the photo to the left. It's the top of the same make of the model at Fukushima, American Twin. TVA owned Browns Ferry, and it is only the top. The yellow dome sits above this, and is even bigger. Here the yellow dome has been removed for refueling. Over 150 feet of reactor sits below that cap. Hydrogen will not vaporize that, which appears to be what happened to number 3, only a nuclear weapon would. Reactors are about 14 digits beyond incapable of going supercritical, even with a complete core meltdown. The reactors did not explode. Something placed in their vicinity did. Magna BSP had access to the reactors at this facility. They were based in Domona, which is a military base that manufactures nuclear weapons. Stuxnet was made in their yard. They are stated to be a military company, and a key piece of their equipment was the same size, shape, weight, and appearance of a gun-type nuclear weapon. There is extremely strong evidence that Domina-based Magna BSP placed nuclear weapons at the exploded or vanished reactors at Fukushima, possibly hidden inside their unbelievably giant stereoscopic cameras. One of these cameras is verified to have been installed inside the inner containment at Fukushima Reactor 3 under the cover of the security contract in the month prior to the disaster. These cameras are identical in size and appearance to a gun-type nuclear weapon. Since previous hydrogen explosions at boiling water reactors have never caused any sort of damage to equipment or building, even during complete meltdowns, it begs the question, how on earth one at Reactor 3 produced a mushroom cloud? 3 Mile Island sits in an evidence pool against what we have been told about Fukushima. History does matter. One problem with the reporting in the mainstream media is that it failed to convey just how massive and strong the containment structures really were, as shown in the photos at the beginning of this report, as well as how huge the reactors really were, as shown in the following photo. A hydrogen explosion would not damage this reactor, and would only blow the sheet metal off the steel-framed roof in the surface area above it, if it even did that. At 3 Mile Island, the hydrogen ignition did nothing at all. It just scared employees. Another thing the reporting failed to convey is the gravity of the disaster. The containment diagram photo showing the remains of Reactor 3 make it painfully obvious that many tons of highly radioactive plutonium in the containment pools is nowhere to be found. The entire floor they were on is completely gone. That was a lot more than a hydrogen blast, and as a result, there are thousands of pounds of plutonium scattered everywhere. The lies regarding this topic seem to be never ending, yet occasionally, even now, a little truth gets through the cracks. One such truth came from a form of a slip-up, where a problem with one of the hydrogen vent stacks, which made the hydrogen explosions flatly impossible, triggered the NHK report that said they could not approach the stack to repair it because radiation readings in the area were at strong 10 full sieverts an hour, a level so high it would only be possible if Reactor 3 did expel its core, as I have stated right from the beginning. 10 sieverts per hour is an insanely high reading, which means that death is virtually assured with very little exposure. No one can fix that stack. It is staying the way it is because any worker who approached it to even look at it would die trying. This means that the main debris fields for Reactor 3, there are positively no workers at all. If there are people walking around at Fukushima, they can only be on the east side of the turbine building or some other place far away and well shielded from Reactor 3. Many people remember the movie The Day After, where radiation sickness killed people over the course of a few weeks. The radiation level at that hard vent stack over 2 years after the explosion at Reactor 3 is still at 10 sieverts an hour, over 1,000 times stronger than what was in The Day After. If the radiation levels at the Reactor 3 were divided by 1,000, they would still be fatal to anyone in under 10 days, a shorter time frame than the deaths that happened in the movie The Day After. And NHK is talking gamma. If it was alpha or beta, workers could just suit up and fix the problem. TEPCO was ridiculed for initially stating that the radiation from the facility was immeasurable. I think they at first told the truth. Now they have this story about the Fukushima 50. Is it in fact a wag the dog? No one could be there and live. Why is remote controlled heavy equipment doing the cleanup? The official story is hydrogen blasts, not nukes. So the storyline has to be at least within the far outer limits of what a hydrogen blast could actually accomplish, not missing reactors and entire fuel pools blown away. The following article documents how Fukushima is so badly contaminated around Reactor 3 that the only thing that can be there is robots and remote-controlled equipment. I have in the past erroneously stated that they took care of the problem with a boron glue that stuck to everything and knocked the radiation down. But if the readings are still 10 an hour, all they could possibly have accomplished is gluing the radioactive material down so that storms could not blow them away in the form of dust. Another thing to note is that the radiation levels on the stack, where it needs to be repaired, are measured at 60 meters from the ground. This could be because it is, at that height, a straight view of Reactor 3 exposed core, which will never be approached and subdued. That would make a lot of sense. I suggest you ponder the pictures and materials presented in this report and apply a little thought to what is here, rather than listen to the Zio press. The following report documents the remote control cleanup at Fukushima, and don't miss where they talk about having to boost the ability of the remote control systems to allow them to be used from 2 kilometers away. Spooky stuff, yes indeed. Fukushima Daiichi workers cleared debris by remote control, 2011, April the 11th. Remotely controlled construction machinery rolled into the site of the stricken Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant last week to help clear roads and passages of radioactive debris, the plant's operator said Monday. The effects of the magnitude 9 earthquake a tsunami estimated at around 15 meters high, and 2 hydrogen explosions in reactor buildings have left the Fukushima Daiichi site covered in rubble and debris, according to images released by Tokyo Electric Power, TEPCO. Some of the debris has high levels of radioactivity, complicating its removal and the movement of workers around the site. The machinery consisted of an excavator and transporter, each equipped with a remote control system. Cameras were mounted on each piece of equipment. TEPCO set an additional 6 cameras around areas where work would take place. The entire operation was managed by the mobile control room, where staff could watch videos from the cameras and manipulate the machinery, said Hiro Hashigawa, a spokesman for the electric utility. The clearance operation began with both units rolled into place near a debris-strewn area. The excavator, which has been fitted with a giant grabber hand, picked up debris and dropped it into a container at the back of the transporter. It took about 2 hours for this to be completed. Once full, the excavator knocked closed the lid of the container and the transporter trundled to a temporary dump site. The Fukushima Daiichi plant, like other nuclear plants in Japan, was built with plenty of open space so the debris can be temporarily collected together on site. The unloading operation took about an hour to complete, and then the cycle began again. The remote-controlled machinery was originally developed for the use in hazardous construction equipments, such as those near volcanoes and where landslides could occur, said a spokesman. The radio-controlled system typically have a range of 300 meters, but this time a radio relay station was used to boost the signal and allow controllers to be used 2 kilometers away. TEPCO has also been used remotely controlled drones and helicopters to get a close-up view of the reactor's building. The company received pictures from a US military Global Hawk drone, and reports say the RQ-16T Hawk micro unmanned air vehicle is also being used. Now that Osama, who has been dead for 10 years, is officially dead, Al-Qaeda is going to use a nuke, so they say. I strongly urge you to consider this article if a nuke actually does go off somewhere, or if other nuclear facilities start acting like Fukushima. The only reason I believe the management at Fukushima is not telling it like it really was is because victim status has been so well asserted by the ethnic group in question that it is a career suicide to point the finger at them, even when they try to kill you. I find it interesting that all 12 non-Japanese employees at Magna BSP returned to Israel a week before the tsunami. I might have understood the need for Stuxnet if its use would have ended with Iran. Unfortunately, that does not appear to be the case. I do hope this article breaks their toy. For those of you who are reluctant to repost this because the wording is too strong, I ask you to consider this. The real answer came out of Fukushima. We have a member of the international community which has already done horrendous damage to a very advanced and presently innocent civilization, and we simply cannot continue to tolerate it. Consider what ignoring this will cost you. Are you prepared to have a major disaster at the convenience of the couch because you are sat there watching TV rather than dragging your butt over to the computer to at least spread the word? Are your video games, ball games, 4x4 or porno really worth continuing to lose everything for? Is your religion going to keep you silent as well? We really need a serious wake-up call. Please let this post be it, rather than some other unforeseen disaster. And that's where the article ends, guys. So, an extremely long one, and serious congratulations if you made it this far. It was definitely a long read for me, but nonetheless, I think it's categorical proof as to what is occurring. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.